Alright, my channel's been doing fairly well recently, so let's see where I am subscriber-wise. Let's see, YouTube Studio... Oh! Huh. Well, how's about that then? Well over 3,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much for getting me to the 3,000 mark. This calls for another celebratory video. I may have created this channel all the way back in 2014, but it wasn't until 2018 that I started being a YouTuber full-time. And over the course of that 8-year period, I've created and hosted over 1,100 videos and live streams covering a very broad variety of topics. Everything from films and TV shows old and new, to theme parks, to video games old and new, especially Spyro the Dragon. But for my 3,000 subscriber special, I think it's only fitting for us to return to my channel's roots, the very thing I named my channel about, trains.
Trains are an inseparable part of my life. They are my oldest passion and have been since I was 2 years old, mainly thanks to Thomas the Tank Engine, countless railway documentaries, and many childhood visits to my local heritage railways. So naturally, I always heavily enjoy making train-related videos on this channel, most notably my heritage railway vlogs and my now discontinued LEGO Railway web series, Redcliffe Railway Tales. While I'm equally enthusiastic about many other things as well, I can guarantee you all that trains will never not be one of my biggest passions. But over the course of my nearly 20 years of being a train enthusiast, I've developed numerous preferences for which ones I like more than others. Don't get me wrong, almost all trains are awesome. There's only a few I'm genuinely not that keen on. I just find some to be far more awesome than others. And in this video, I'd like to talk about the 25 British steam locomotive classes I love most of all. Now there are a few rules for this list, the two most obvious being that I'm only including steam locomotives on this list, and I'm only including ones built to run here in Britain. If there's enough demand, I might, at some point in the future, make further countdown lists covering my favourite British diesel and electric locomotives, as well as ones covering international locomotives. The third rule for this list is that there are going to be more than 25 individual locomotive classes on this list. What I mean by this is that while there will be 25 spots on this list, some of them will be shared by 2 or more locomotive classes, either if they're very similar in design, built to do more or less the same work, or I simply can't decide which one I prefer more than the other. So yes, expect a lot of shared spots on this list. And lastly, standard gauge engines only on this list. Again, if there's enough demand, I might eventually do a top 10 or 20 favourite British narrow and minimum gauge steam locomotives. Alright, with all 4 rules for this list established, let's get right into it. These are my top 25 favourite British steam locomotives. For number 25, we have the Great Northern Railway C1 Atlantics. Designed by Henry Ivert, a grand total of 116 of these magnificent express locomotives were built between 1898 and 1910, 22 of these being small boiler versions and 94 being large boiler versions. Only 2 C1s have survived into preservation, one small boiler version, number 990 Henry Oakley, and one large boiler version, number 251, both of which are now part of the National Collection. It's important to note that the small boiler C1s were reclassified as C2s by the London and North Eastern Railway after the Great Northern Railway became part of the LNER under the 1923 Grouping Act, while the large boiler C1s remained as, well, C1s. Despite suffering from a great number of teething troubles during their early years, the C1s were generally very successful engines. They may not be the biggest or most advanced express locomotives, but my god are they gorgeous. Plus, Their 90-mile-an-hour top speed is pretty damn decent for late Victorian and Edwardian locomotives, and the fact they stuck around all the way into early BR days should be a testament to how successful they were, remaining in frontline service for the majority of their working lives, and sometimes hauling trains with a total weight of over 500 tons, often being called upon to take over from failed Gresley Pacifics and putting up remarkable performances in doing so. One C1 once took over the Flying Scotsman, as in the Edinburgh to London named express service, not the actual locomotive, from a failed A3 Pacific at Peterborough, and not only made up time but arrived early at London King's Cross. So with such a strong performance track record, solid overall design and stunning appearance, is it any wonder why us train enthusiasts, myself included, love the Great Northern C1s? There are certainly far bigger, faster, stronger, more advanced and overall better express locomotives in this country, but the C1s certainly have their place among the most noteworthy and awesome in British railway history. I just wish we had more than two in preservation. At number 24, we have the Southern Railway U and S15 classes. Yes, already we have two locomotives sharing the same spot because I simply can't decide which of the two I prefer more. So let's talk about them both at the same time. The U-Class engines were designed by Richard Maunsell for go anywhere, do anything, mixed traffic duties across the Southern Railway's network, with a total of 50 being built between 1928 and 1931. Most of them were built from scratch, while others were rebuilds of the older South Eastern and Chatham Railway River-class express tank engines. Ideal for pulling both cross-country and semi-fast passenger trains, as well as fast and semi-fast goods trains, the U-Class were reliable and economical engines more than capable of running at 70+ miles an hour. These impressive performance capabilities and their high reliability, coupled with their powerful yet graceful appearance, and the fact they're fitted with those fairly small Maunsell smoke deflectors, a design which fits these engines like a glove, makes them some of my favourite 260 moguls ever built. I'm very grateful that 4 of these lovely engines are still around in preservation today, with both the Bluebell and Swanage railways being home to a fair share of 2 each. As for the S15s, these 460s were purely freight engines, initially designed by Robert Urey for the London and South Western Railway, and later modified by Richard Maunsell when the LSWR became part of the Southern Railway under the 1923 Grouping Act, with a total of 45 S15s being built at Eastleigh Works between 1920 and 1936. The S15s were held in high regard by locomotive crews, performing extremely well on heavy nighttime express goods trains and milk and dairy trains, which were of course carrying perishable goods that required fast transit to the dairies of London, which these lovely engines more than excelled at. The S15s performed so well in fact, they were even, on rare occasions, used on passenger trains, filling in for the usual passenger locomotives whenever there was a shortage of them during peak holiday periods. The S15s had decently long working careers as well, carrying on right up until 1966, with 7 being preserved in total, all of which were rescued from the famous Barry scrapyard in Wales. Like the U-Class moguls, the S15s are very powerful yet graceful for their size, and also have those small yet visually appealing Maunsell smoke deflectors. I personally have some very fond memories of travelling behind U-Class number 1638 and S15 number 847 on the Bluebell Railway when I was a kid. Yes, in terms of historical significance, there's not much to them, but who cares? Historical significance is lovely for engines to have, of course, but no engine has to be the Flying Scotsman to be amazing. If these massively underrated Southern Railway engines aren't proof of that, I don't know what is. And at number 23, we have the Great Western Railway Halls and Manors, 2 classes of 460 mixed traffic locomotives. The Halls were designed by Charles Collett as go anywhere, do anything, heavy mixed traffic engines, with 258 being built at Swindon Works between 1928 and 1943. Charles Collett's successor, Frederick Hawkesworth, later modified the design, with a further 71 of these modified halls being built between 1944 and 1950, giving the GWR a combined grand total of 329 Hall-class locomotives. And did the Hall succeed in their goal of being highly versatile, I hear you ask? By God, yes, I answer. Throughout their 37-year-long working lives, they could be seen across the vast majority of the Great Western Railway's network, on everything from express goods trains to secondary express and semi-fast passenger trains, and even, sometimes, on the Great Western's flagship express passenger trains, such as the Cornish Riviera Express, where they take over the train from the much larger and heavier King-class engines, which brought the train from London Paddington to Plymouth. From there, either a Hall or Castle class would have taken the Cornish Riviera over the Royal Albert Bridge into Cornwall, and on to its final destination, Penzance, with this loco change being necessary due to the Kings simply being too heavy for the Royal Albert Bridge to regularly take their weight. The halls, being smaller and lighter than the castles and Kings, may have been able to comply with the majority of the GWR network's weight restrictions, but even they were too heavy for several of the network's cross-country and branch lines, and that was where the even smaller and lighter Manor-class engines came in. The Manors, also designed by Charles Collett, first came about in 1938, exactly 10 years after the first of the halls. The Manor's very light axle loading of just over 17 tons broadened their route availability enormously compared to the halls, enabling them to venture onto many of the highly restricted through and branch lines of Wales, including the infamous Cambrian line. Despite being the smallest of the GWR 460s, the Manors were still more than capable mixed traffic engines, even doing their own fair share of express train work, most notably heading the Cambrian Coast Express, taking over from the Castles and Kings, which brought the train from London at Wolverhampton Low Level, before bringing the train on into Wales to terminate at either Aberystwyth or Pwllheli. Unfortunately, the Manor's performance was initially mediocre in comparison to the Hall and Grange classes, with the Manors proving to have much poorer steaming rates and higher fuel consumption. However, these issues have been ironed out by 1952, after which they continued to perform well for another 13 years, until the last of them were withdrawn in December 1965. Very impressively, almost a full third of all Manor-class engines have survived into preservation, with 9 of the total 30 built still around today. Now, the reason both the Halls and Manors are sharing the same spot on this list is because, while the Halls are bigger and I find them more awesome, I can't help but love the Manors equally as much. There's just something so charming and endearing about seeing and travelling behind engines that are so small for 460 tender engines. I simply find the Manors, dare I say it, cute. And surprisingly, the Manors even have a slightly higher tractive effort than the Halls, which really says a lot if you ask me. They may not be the biggest, fastest, strongest and best of the Great Western 460s, but the high success of the Halls, cuteness of the Manors, and high versatility and powerfulness for their size of both makes them 2 of the GWR's most recognisable, noteworthy and beloved locomotive classes, ones which absolutely deserve a shared spot on this list. Moving on to number 22, we have the Southern Railway King Arthur class. Again, initially designed by Robert Urey for the London and South Western Railway, this fleet of 74 large yet slim and graceful 460s were built for the LSWR's flagship express trains to cope with the increase in passenger traffic between London and the South West, particularly on the heavy boat trains from London Waterloo to Portsmouth, Weymouth and Southampton following the end of World War I. Despite the class having several mechanical problems at one point or another throughout their working lives, the King Arthurs proved mostly fairly successful in their frontline express duties, showing improvements over the older T14 and H15 classes. After the LSWR became part of the Southern Railway, the newly amalgamated company's publicity department gave these locomotives names associated with the legend of King Arthur, due to the railway company's association with the southwest of England. Such recognisable, noble and regal names work really well for such large, fast and powerful, yet regal and graceful express locomotives in my opinion. Aside from hauling flagship express trains, the King Arthurs were also used on commuter trains into and out of London, and even occasional fast freight trains from Southampton docks. In 1926, the King Arthurs also became the first British steam locomotives ever to be equipped with smoke deflectors, which, as many of you already know, in my opinion almost always make steam locomotives look far more badass than they already are. Emphasis on almost though. After a long, fulfilling service life spanning 44 years, the last of the King Arthurs were withdrawn in 1962. Unfortunately, despite the fact 2 individual King Arthur boilers have been preserved, only one fully intact King Arthur has made it into preservation. Number 777... No, not that 777, idiot! Number 777 Sir Lamiel, who's now part of the National Collection and has been based at the Great Central Railway in Leicestershire since 1996. His brother, number 453 King Arthur, was selected for preservation at first, but Sir Lamiel was ultimately chosen instead due to him being closer to original condition upon withdrawal from BR service. Having last ran in 2017, as of this video's premiere date, Sir Lamiel is currently under overhaul at the Loughborough Locomotive Works and is expected to return to service at some point in 2026. So if you live within easy reach of the GCR, make sure you go and see this sole surviving Green Knight as often as you can while his next 10-year boiler ticket lasts. Overall, the King Arthurs are simply hugely underrated 460s. Big, powerful and versatile, yet somehow so well proportioned they're simultaneously slim and graceful, and with one of the regalest and most fitting naming themes express locomotives could have. Why couldn't we have had more than one of these noble knights in preservation, eh? At number 21, we have two more 460s, but this time from the eastern region, the LNER B1s and B12s. Let's talk about the much older B12s first. Dating as far back as 1911, designed by Stephen Dewar Holden and based on the even older Claude Hamilton Class 440s, these engines, built for the Great Eastern Railway and originally classified as S69s, were again built to haul the company's heaviest express passenger trains, which the Claude Hamiltons could no longer handle. Throughout the summer months of the 1910s and 20s, the S69s, or B12s, were very common sights on seaside and holiday express trains out of London Liverpool Street, running deep into East Anglia up the Great Eastern Main Line. It wasn't until the 1923 grouping, when the Great Eastern Railway became part of the London and North Eastern Railway, that the LNER decided to reclassify these engines as B12s, with a final batch of 10 being built for the LNER 5 years later, in 1928, by Bayer Peacock and Company of Manchester, bringing the total number of B12s built to 81. Over the following years, the B12s underwent many rebuilds, resulting in several subclasses and the removal of the decorative valances over the driving wheels all older class members were originally built with. Personally, I think the B12s look much better without the valances. By 1931, many of the B12s had been displaced from their flagship heavy express train duties by the stronger and faster 3-cylinder B17s, more on them later on, so 25 of the B12s were transferred to Scotland for use on the former Great North of Scotland railway lines, while the rest remained in East Anglia. Towards the end of World War II, some B12s were even shipped over to continental Europe to haul ambulance trains for the US Army. 72 B12s were still in service by the time Britain's railways were nationalised in 1948. They were slowly but surely withdrawn over the next 13 years, with the last one, number 8572, being withdrawn in 1961. 8572 is now preserved on the North Norfolk Railway, not only as the sole surviving B12, but also as the only British inside-cylinder 460 to make it into preservation. That unique quality of his alone, combined with how simplistic in appearance, yet big and gorgeous the B12s are, guaranteed these engines a shared spot on this list. There's just something about British steam locomotives built between 1870 and 1923 that makes them look fast, powerful and awesome, yet gives them a very lovely, simplistic, charming and sweet retro soft spot. I'm not 100% sure if it's to do with most of them having inside cylinders or something else entirely. Please let me know in the comments or Premiere Live chat if you think you know what it is. Either way, the B12s absolutely have this soft spot to them, and that's also part of what makes them some of my favourite 460s. Now let's talk about their much younger outside cylinder cousins, the B1s. Designed by Edward Thompson and first built in 1942, during the thick of World War II, the B1s were designed for slightly less glamorous work than the flagship express work the B12s were built for. The B1s were mixed traffic engines, being the LNER's equivalent of the Great Western Hauls and the LMS Stania Black 5s. With Europe's railways being in maximum overdrive pretty much throughout the entire war, it should come as no surprise that a staggering 410 of these mixed traffic workhorses were built in total, with the last one being completed in 1952. The B1s were an immediate success, operating throughout almost every corner of the LNER's network, hauling everything from named express trains to London-Liverpool Street to Harwich boat trains to fast and semi-fast freight trains. Unfortunately, the requirement for the B1s to be built cheaply due to wartime restrictions resulted in them having poor ride quality, which wasn't something many LNER enginemen were used to on Sir Nigel Gresley's engines. The B1s did, however, have good starting power and excellent hill climbing abilities. One of the B1s, number 61156, even hauled the last commercial steam-hauled passenger train into London Liverpool Street, this being the Up-Day Continental from Harwich on the 9th of September 1962. The B1s were withdrawn between 1961 and 1967 after, at most, just 25 years of commercial service, with some of them being retained as departmental stock for use as mobile carriage heating boilers. Despite the high number of B1s built, somehow only 2 were preserved. Number 61306 Mayflower, who was privately purchased directly into preservation, and to this day can still be seen regularly hauling mainline rail tours all over the country, and number 61264, who has the distinction of being the only ex-LNER locomotive to be sent to Barry Scrapyard, where he remained for 5 years until being purchased for preservation in 1973. The B1s may not quite be the most memorable, significant, or even the most visually pleasing of the LNER steam locomotives, even compared to the B12s, but god damn it, I still love them. They're versatile workhorses and look incredible, especially running at speed, be they pulling a passenger train, freight train, works train, or even running light engine. The B12s, on the other hand, may not have originally been built to do quite as wide a variety of work, but they're simply absolutely striking and some of my favourite pre-grouping engines. I mean seriously, someone please get 8572 mainline certified. I'd love to travel on a rail tour up the Great Eastern Main Line behind him. Need I say more? The B1s and B12s are both wonderful engines that need more love and appreciation from us train enthusiasts. And of course, more of both classes should have made it into preservation. For number 20, we have the Southern Railway Lord Nelson class, the largest and most powerful engines ever designed by Richard Maunsell, and the largest and most powerful 460s ever built for the Southern Railway, capable of pulling the company's heaviest express trains at an average sustained speed of 55 miles an hour. Even when they were first introduced between 1926 and 1929, the Lord Nelsons were fairly rare compared to the King Arthur's S15s and U's, with only 16 Lord Nelsons being built in total, initially for mainly pulling continental boat trains, including the famous Golden Arrow Pullman train from London Victoria to Dover Harbour. One of the main aspects that make the Lord Nelsons one of my favourite Southern Railway locomotive classes is their cylinder layout. The Lord Nelsons have not 2, not 3, but 4 cylinders, a design which is fairly uncommon for British steam locomotives, but makes them extraordinarily powerful and enables them to make sounds which are just total ear candy. So if the Lord Nelsons were that powerful at only 30 miles an hour, just imagine how fast they and other 4-cylinder engines could have gone if they were streamlined and given the opportunity for a good, fast, record-breaking run on a flat, dead straight stretch of mainline. Mallard and the other A4s are only 3-cylinder engines, don't forget, so I think a streamlined Lord Nelson or LMS Coronation could have easily beaten Mallard's 126 mile an hour speed record. Now with 4 cylinders, an enormous tractive effort of 33,510 pounds, making them the most powerful British steam locomotives ever built at the time, and sounds as incredible as these, you'd think the Lord Nelsons would have stellar performance, right? Well, initially, not exactly. The performance of the Lord Nelsons was mixed at first, depending on crew experience and operational circumstances, they were notoriously difficult for inexperienced crews to fire properly due to their long fireboxes. It wasn't until Richard Maunsell's successor, Oliver Bulleid, modified all the Lord Nelsons in 1938, giving them larger diameter chimneys and Latimer blast pipes, that their performance was effectively transformed, and they finally ran as amazingly as Maunsell had intended, and became highly respected by both locomotive crews and the Southern Railway's upper management. As you may have guessed, like the King Arthurs, the Lord Nelsons were also given very noble and regal names, with all of them being named after British Royal Navy admirals, which, again in my opinion, fits express locomotives like gloves, with the first class member built, number 850 Lord Nelson, not only giving the whole class its namesake, but also being named after the famous admiral Lord Horatio Viscount Nelson, who's widely regarded as one of the greatest admirals in history, scoring a number of decisive British naval victories during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, and famously sacrificing himself during the Battle of Trafalgar on the 21st of October 1805. So yes, naming what was at the time the Southern Railway's biggest, most powerful, and greatest flagship express passenger locomotive class, after one of the greatest and most legendary admirals in history, was such an inspired choice in my opinion, especially considering these locomotives were initially built to pull express boat trains from London to the south coast, so middle and upper class holidaymakers could begin their own epic seabound adventures to continental Europe and the rest of the world, sailing the seven seas in the wakes of all 16 admirals the 16 Lord Nelson class locomotives were named after. After World War II, the Lord Nelsons had their range of express train work broadened, and they began to be frequently used on slightly less luxurious trains, such as the heavily laden boat trains from London Waterloo to Southampton Docks. By the end of the 1940s, the Lord Nelsons had been superseded on the flagship expresses by the newer, even larger, faster and stronger Bulleid Pacifics, mostly relegating the Lord Nelsons to secondary express trains, although during the 1950s they were still frequently called upon to haul flagship expresses during peak periods or to deputise for failed Bulleid Pacifics. However, the rebuilding of most of the Pacifics in the late 1950s and their subsequent increased reliability rendered the Lord Nelsons surplus to operational requirements, leading to them gradually being phased out of service between 1961 and 1962, with only one of them, the original number 850 Lord Nelson, being preserved, also as part of the National Collection. Since preservation, Lord Nelson was a fairly frequent sight on mainline rail tours until his boiler ticket expired back in 2015. As of this video's premiere date, he's currently based at the Mid-Hants Railway in Hampshire, awaiting his next overhaul. Hopefully he'll be back in service within the next few years. Overall, the Lord Nelsons are absolute beasts of locomotives, enormous in both size and power, able to make heavenly sounds, and given perfect names to reflect their size, power, regalness, and luxury boat train duties. The Lord Nelson class was simply Richard Maunsell's magnum opus, the pinnacle of 460 locomotive designs. At least, that's what the Southern Railway would have liked to believe. We'll get to the actual best 460s ever built later. Only 16 Lord Nelsons may have been built in total, but couldn't we have had at least one more in preservation? We have a lot of locomotives crammed into the number 19 spot, these being every single Great Central Railway locomotive designed by John George Robinson. Mr. Robinson was Chief Mechanical Engineer of the Great Central Railway from 1900 to 1922, and from looking at all the engines he designed, I think you can guess why I love them so much. For pre-grouping locomotives, they are absolute thick boys, aren't they? Regardless of what type of engine they were, what work they were built to do, or even what their wheel arrangement was, almost all the engines Robinson designed were absolutely enormous. From the Class 11Fs, which by the way are my favourite 440s ever built, to the bigger and even better 460 Class 9Ps, to my favourite Atlantics ever built, the Class 8Bs, to the bulky Class 8A 080s, to perhaps my favourite Great Central engines of all, the Class 8K 280 freight engines. Even the comparatively small 060 Class 9Js are basically dummy thick LMS 4Fs or Southern Railway Maunsell Qs. And how can we forget about the especially chonky Class HH084 tank engines, which are among my favourite tank engines ever built, alongside the Great Western Railway 4200s and 7200s. Now, the reason Robinson's Great Central engines are so thick is mainly due to the ambitious plans the GCR and its director, Sir Edward Watkin, had at the time to become one of Britain's biggest and most powerful railway companies. You see, the GCR had a much bigger loading gauge than most other pre-grouping railway companies. Loading gauge is not to be confused with track gauge, this referring to the width of the track trains run on and thus need to be built for, whereas loading gauge refers to the maximum height and width the train themselves can safely be in order to ensure they'll have enough clearance when stopped at and passing through station platforms, as well as when crossing and passing under bridges, going through tunnels and cuttings, making sure they accidentally won't clip and knock over line-side infrastructure, like signs, walls, fences, etc. The reason for the GCR's loading gauge being larger than normal for most British railways is frequently claimed to be that the London extension was designed to the larger continental European loading gauge for the purpose of accommodating mainland locomotives and rolling stock, as part of Edward Watkin's grand plan to build his own Channel tunnel under the English Channel to connect the GCR and the rest of the British railway network with the French railway network. However, this reasoning has seemingly been debunked, and the new claim by railway historians is that the London extension was built to what just so happened to be the standard Great Central loading gauge of the time. Regardless of whatever the real reason for the GCR's early 20th century engines being so dummy thick is though, no matter which Great Central Robinson locomotive you look at pictures of, it's almost guaranteed to be a big, bulky, chunky and plumpy boy, except for the Class 5A dock tanks. Their small boilers being so disproportionate to their large side tanks makes them a slight disappointment to me. It is a crime that only two of Robinson's Great Central beefy boys have been preserved, one 11F and one 8K. Seriously, why couldn't we have also had at least one 8H, one 9P, one 8B and one 8A? Perhaps even one 9J? For some Robinson engines, I simply can't decide which I love more than others, so I thought, what the hell, I'll just cram them all into one spot. Some of you may call this cheating, but I don't care. I mean, how can you not love all these absolute units equally? Now moving on to number 18, we have the L&ER B2s and B17s. It's worth noting that the B2s are literally just rebuilt B17s, so we'll start by talking about the latter. The B17s were designed by none other than Sir Nigel Gresley himself to be more or less the Great Eastern Main Line's equivalent of Gresley's bigger and far more renowned A1/3 Pacifics, mainly seen on the East Coast Main Line. A total of 73 B17s were built between 1928 and 1937, and very quickly displaced some of the older B12s, which, as passenger train lengths and weights increased, could no longer cope with the Great Eastern Main Line's heaviest express trains out of London Liverpool Street up to Cambridge, Ipswich and Norwich by the late 1920s. Gresley's Pacifics couldn't be used on the Great Eastern Main Line due to the line having much stricter weight restrictions than the East Coast Main Line, so a lightweight yet powerful 460 for the B12 successors was required instead. Said requirement proved very difficult for Gresley to achieve, but after several unsuccessful attempts to satisfy this specification, he got there in the end. The first batch of B17s used several design features from the A1 Pacifics. The three-cylinder design and layout, cab and motion had all either been directly copied from the A1's design or slightly modified, with the boiler mostly being derived from Gresley's K3 and O2 class engines. With a light axle loading of 18 tons, this did permit the B17s onto some parts of the former Great Eastern Railways network, including the Great Eastern Main Line itself, but they still weren't permitted across the entire ex-GER network, as was originally intended, due to the class's axle loading being 1 ton higher than the stipulated 17-ton requirement. The L&ER did accept this restriction, however. Due to the B17's design continuing to prove problematic, the first locomotive, number 2802 Walsingham, ended up being delivered 13 weeks late on November 30th, 1928. These problems only continued after the first B17s entered service, which had a number of teething troubles, most notably frame cracking. To try and fix this, the second batch was built with lighter springs on their driving axle boxes, as well as stiffer springs on their front pony trucks. These modifications were unfortunately ineffective, and fractured frames continued to plague the B-17s, so for the third batch, further suspension modifications were made, as well as having horn blocks for the middle driving axle fitted rather than guides, and having a different axle box lubrication mechanism fitted. But even after all these improvements, the B-17 still had a reputation for being rough riders throughout their entire working lives. The class eventually gained the nickname footballers, due to roughly a third of them being named after football clubs. Despite the B-17's teething troubles, and one of them suffering a major derailment on the Great Eastern Main Line, they proved popular with both passengers and railwaymen, especially after first entering service on Liverpool Street to Cambridge Express trains. Unfortunately, Liverpool Street to Ipswich and Norwich Expresses proved a lot more problematic for the B-17s, due to the Great Eastern Main Line having gradients which caused problems for heavier trains. As a result, the class was liked a lot more by Cambridge crews than Ipswich crews. Perhaps the most interesting thing that ever happened to the B-17s occurred in September 1937, when two of them, numbers 2859 and 2870, were given A4 style streamlining and chime whistles for the flagship Liverpool Street to Norwich East Anglian Express service. However, unlike the A4s, this streamlining was for glamour and publicity only, and served little to no practical purpose for increasing the B-17's top speeds. Still though, you can't deny that the streamlined B-17s look interesting. Seeing an A4 style 460 is simultaneously blessed and cursed, isn't it? This streamlining lasted on both engines until April 1951. After World War II, Gresley's successor, Edward Thompson, had 10 of the B-17s rebuilt with his new B1 style boilers, and only 2 cylinders instead of 3, to create the B2 class. Only 10 of these rebuilds occurred due to the huge success of the B1s. 2 of the B2s were specially allocated to hauling the royal train throughout East Anglia, whenever the royal family was staying at Sandringham House, with number 1671 being accordingly renamed Royal Sovereign for these prestigious duties. The remaining 8 B-17s were mainly used on the Liverpool Street to Clacton Seaside Expresses. There's really not much I can say about the B2s, as aside from them having one less cylinder and a slightly different boiler, they're pretty much identical and did more or less the same work as the B-17s. The B2s only had a maximum service life of 14 years anyway, with the last one being withdrawn and scrapped in 1959. The B-17s, meanwhile, carried on for another year until 1960, after being given a much more generous 32-year-long service life. But very sadly, not a single B-17, let alone a single B2, has been preserved. However, a few of the Locomotives' nameplates were donated to the respective football clubs they were named after. One B-17 tender has also thankfully been preserved, and even more thankfully, these underrated express engines hopefully won't be extinct for much longer. On May 1st, 2008, Steam Railway magazine announced in issue 349 that 2 new-build B-17s were in the planning stages. One was to be a replica of number 61662, Manchester United, and the other would be a completely new class number, numbered 61673 and named Spirit of Sandringham. Construction on Spirit of Sandringham began at the Llangollen Railway, while Manchester United was being built at a private site by the 61662 Appeal. Unfortunately, it was announced in November 2020 that the 61662 project was being terminated. Meanwhile, the frames of Spirit of Sandringham were moved to CTL Seal Limited in Sheffield in October 2020, where the new build B-17 still remains under construction as of this video's premiere date, with a decent amount of progress being made so far over the past 18 years. If you want to keep up to date with Spirit of Sandringham's construction progress, I'll leave a link to the B-17 Steam Locomotive Trust's website in the description. Personally, I cannot wait for Spirit of Sandringham's completion, and finally seeing this engine rushing around the country on mainline rail tours, and of course seeing it taking it a bit easier on heritage railways. Yes, the B-17s may have been problematic, especially in their early lives, but when they did work properly, they must have been awesome to watch race by and travel behind. At least, if watching them in action in model form is anything to go by. And they were 3-cylinder engines, so undoubtedly must have made a bloody good sound. Their eventual return from extinction is absolutely deserved in my opinion. Like the vast majority of trains, they never deserved to all be scrapped to begin with, don't you think? Moving on to number 17, we now have two LMS 460s, the Royal Scot and Jubilee classes. Starting with the older, much more renowned and beloved Royal Scots, they were originally designed by Sir Henry Fowler and first introduced in 1927. Prior to the 1923 grouping, Henry Fowler had been Chief Mechanical Engineer of the Midland Railway, a company which very infamously had a small engine policy, which, as its name suggests, mandated that all the railway's engines be built to as small a design as their capability requirements would allow for. When the Midland Railway became part of the newly formed London, Midland and Scottish Railway, as part of the grouping, the LMS kept up the Midland Railway small engine policy, a decision which was a huge mistake. You see, one of the Midland Railway's biggest rivals, the London and North Western Railway, which was also grouped into the LMS, had pretty much the complete opposite policy with its locomotives, building theirs as big as possible, which was necessary in order for them to tackle the very steep gradients of the West Coast Main Line, especially Shap. This huge oversight of the LMSs resulted in them having no sufficiently powerful locomotives for their West Coast Main Line express trains. Despite the LMS being satisfied with the small engine policy, Henry Fowler began designing a 462 Pacific locomotive, no doubt inspired by Gresley's A1s, in 1926. Eventually, the LMS's management, faced with intense disagreement between their other departments and Fowler, was able to loan one of the GWR's Castle-class locomotives, Lunkerston Castle, which was trialled on express trains between London Euston and Carlisle. Following the success of Lunkerston Castle's work on the LMS, it was decided to cancel Fowler's Pacific project in favour of a 3-cylinder 460 design. The first batch of 50 Royal Scots were built by the North British Locomotive Company of Glasgow, and unbelievably, they were allowed to enter service without even undergoing any testing or running in. A further 20 Royal Scots were built at Derby Works 3 years later in 1930. They were all initially named after regiments of the British Army and after historic LNWR locomotives. Those with LNWR names were renamed between 1935 and 1936, with more regiment names. Upon entering service, the Royal Scots quickly took over all of the LMS's flagship named express trains, including one which shared the name of the class, the London to Glasgow Royal Scot Express. By September 1927, the class were regularly running record-breaking non-stop journeys on the 299-mile stretch between London and Carlisle, a previously impossible feat with even the largest ex-LNWR locomotives, even when two were double-heading a train. This marked a significant improvement in the operational efficiency of the LMS's flagship expresses, and should be a huge testament to how powerful and revolutionary the Royal Scots were. With their 33,150-pound tractive effort, more than even the Gresley A1s, A3s, and Great Western Castles, and outmatched only by the Southern Railway Lord Nelsons and Great Western Kings. On their expresses, the Royal Scots demonstrated very strong performances, maintaining schedules with average speeds of 50 to 60 miles an hour over extended distances. In 1933, the LMS agreed to send one of their Royal Scots, along with 8 express coaches, to the Century of Progress International Exposition in Chicago to help strengthen British and US relations. To ensure the engine wouldn't break down during its time in the States, it was decided to send over a freshly overhauled Scot, which ended up being number 6152, the King's Dragoon Guardsman. 6152 had its name and number swapped with the original Royal Scot himself, number 6100, before setting off on his American trip, which ended up being a huge success. The newly rechristened Royal Scot ended up covering over 10,000 miles before and after the exposition. At the Chicago Exposition, Royal Scot was displayed as a static exhibit, attracting over 2 million visitors over the 5-month-long event. If those statistics don't prove how beloved and awesome the Royal Scot class was back then, and still is now, I don't know what does. After the exposition and a brief farewell tour, Royal Scot returned home in December without even swapping his name back to the King's Dragoon Guardsmen. During World War II, the Royal Scots, true to their names, were heavily utilised on troop trains across the LMS network, as well as continuing their flagship express train duties. From 1943 to 1955, all 70 Royal Scots were heavily rebuilt at Derby Works, with their original parallel boilers being replaced with larger tapered boilers designed by William Stanier, as well as being given extended smoke boxes, Latimer double chimneys to improve exhaust efficiency, new cylinder castings and revised frames. This rebuilding program significantly boosted the Royal Scots' reliability and power output. Personally, while I do love the original Henry Fowler design of these engines, I can't help but slightly prefer the rebuilt William Stanier design. Hardline LMS fanboys may or may not shoot me for saying that. Following the 1948 nationalisation, the Royal Scots remained a mainstay on express trains all the way up to the mid-1960s, with withdrawals occurring between October 1962 and January 1966, and 2 of the 70 total Royal Scots being preserved. Number 46115 Scots Guardsman was purchased directly from BR by R.A. Bill in 1966, and number 46100 Royal Scot, who's really the King's Dragoon Guardsman and never returned the name and number he stole from the original Royal Scot before his American tour, was also purchased directly from BR by none other than Billy Butlin himself, for cosmetic restoration and static display at his famous holiday camps. After both preserved Royal Scots spent many years mostly on static display and doing limited demonstration runs, they'd both been overhauled to mainline standards by the end of the 2000s, and since then have more or less remained extensively active on mainline rail tours and heritage railways. And come on, I know we can't save them all, but surely a few more of these fine Scottish soldiers could have been preserved. I mean, just look and listen to this, and tell me these aren't engines we need to see more of across the country. You can't, can you? Need I say more? But what about the Jubilee class engines I love equally as much? Well, they first came about in 1934, 7 years after the first of the Royal Scots. Henry Fowler had retired the year before, so the Jubilees were the brainchildren of the LMS's new chief mechanical engineer, William Stanier, with a total of 191 being built between 1934 and 1936. They were basically Henry Fowler's Patriot class engines, only fitted with Stanier's tapered boilers, with what was supposed to be the last 5 of the Patriots instead becoming the first 5 of the Jubilees. They were initially a disappointment though, with their insufficient superheating and oversized blast pipes often leaving them short of steam. But modifications to their blast pipe and chimney dimensions transformed them into far more reliable and capable express workhorses. The Jubilees were mostly named after former Commonwealth states and countries of the British Empire, as well as British Navy commanders and admirals, and notable Royal Navy ships. The Jubilees were the mainstay of express trains on the Midland Main Line, being the largest express engines commonly found running in and out of London St Pancras. They were also a very common sight on the West Coast Main Line and even the Settle and Carlisle line. Unfortunately, they were eventually displaced from their flagship Midland Main Line and Settle Carlisle express train duties by the Royal Scots in the 1940s. While their initially mixed reception did improve over time, the Jubilees never quite gained the same amount of praise as Stanier's similar-looking Black Fives. But personally, I love the Jubilees far more than the Black Fives. For a start, the Jubilees are basically 3-cylinder Black Fives, and at this point, you should all be well aware of how much I love the sound of 3- and 4-cylinder engines. Also, the Jubilees were far more often than not painted in much more interesting liveries than the much duller LMS and BR Black liveries the vast majority of the Black Fives were painted in. Yes, I know they're called Black 5s, and as such, I agree black suits them best, but come on, how can anyone deny that LMS Crimson Lake, and even Brunswick Green, looks far more stunning and eye-catching? The Jubilees are simply far more interesting versions of the Black 5s to me. They have everything that makes the Black 5s great and then some. Sure, they may not be as recognisable, let alone as legendary as the Royal Scots, and they may not be as flexible and versatile as the Black 5s, but I just have a soft spot for the Jubilees that makes me love them just as much as the Scots. So in my opinion, it's a massive shame that nowhere near as many Jubilees were preserved as Black 5s were. Number 45637 Windward Islands was the first Jubilee to be withdrawn and scrapped, after being destroyed in the infamous Harrow and Wheelstone crash, while the rest of the class was withdrawn between 1960 and 1967. 4 Jubilees have been preserved, 2 having been purchased directly from BR, and the other 2 being rescued from Barry Scrapyard. All 4 have hauled mainline rail tours at some point in their preservation careers, and remain fairly regular sights on said rail tours to this day. Overall, the Royal Scots are simply legendary express thoroughbreds, while the Jubilees are slightly humbler, yet underrated passenger workhorses, who are sometimes unfairly overlooked compared to the much more common, and in my opinion slightly overrated, Black 5s. Both these classes are truly the finest of the LMS's 460s. For number 16, we have the Southern Railway Bully Pacifics. Yes, you knew these lovely lads would be on the list, didn't you? The Bully Pacifics collectively consist of 2 classes of 3-cylinder 462 express locomotives, the Merchant Navies and the Light Pacifics, the latter of which being better known as the West Countries and Battle of Britons, all of which were designed by Oliver Bulleid, with the Merchant Navies coming first, and a total of 30 being built between 1941 and 1949. Immediately, you'll notice they don't really look like regular steam locomotives, do they? Their boxy appearance, which gained them the nickname Spam Cans, is one of the many unique design choices Bulleid made when drawing up these engines. This boxiness being their air-smoothed casing, which is basically a form of semi-streamlining, except it isn't really, because it was actually designed as a way of lifting steam out of the driver's view, as well as enabling the engines to be cleaned with mechanical carriage washers, in an attempt to speed up cleaning and reduce labour costs. Other unique design choices Bulleid made for the Merchant Navies included giving them welded boilers and fireboxes, making them some of the first ever British steam locomotives to use such boilers and fireboxes, as well as giving them his unique and highly recognisable Firth Brown disc driving wheels, along with his controversial and very unreliable chain-driven valve gear. The prototype Merchant Navy was completed at Eastleigh Works in February 1941. Using Bulleid's unique continental numbering system, it was numbered 21C1 and named Channel Packet, kicking off the theme of these engines all being named after the Merchant Navy shipping lines involved in the Battle of the Atlantic during World War II. The class was initially used on express trains from Waterloo to Southampton and Exeter. However, almost immediately, several major mechanical problems with the class emerged. These included them being very vulnerable to wheel slip and their chain-driven valve gear wearing out very quickly, despite being completely submerged in an oil bath and being very expensive to maintain. Some of the Merchant Navies even, to put it simply, spontaneously combusted. The engine's oil baths were prone to leaking, you see, and some of this leaked oil would be soaked up by the lagging sandwiched between the boiler and air-smooth casing. The lagging being saturated with oil resulted in it attracting coal dust and ash, only increasing its flammability even further. And with these engines being prone to producing sparks from their heavy braking force, said sparks would hit the oil and coal dust covered lagging and... yeah. And don't even get me started on these engines' high fuel consumption and the air-smooth casing actually reducing driver visibility instead of increasing it, like it was supposed to! These problems, along with several others, resulted in serious consideration being given to scrapping the entire barely 10-year-old class in 1954 and replacing them with the much newer BR Britannias. However, Even BR had to admit that the merchant navies hadn't been complete disasters, as some of Bulleid's novel design features, especially the welded boilers and fireboxes, had actually proved extremely successful. Therefore, the decision was made to completely rebuild the entire class instead, keeping everything that worked for the engines and removing everything that didn't. As a result, the merchant navies went from looking like spam cans to looking like much more conventional steam locomotives. The rebuilt merchant navies had their air smooth casing removed and their chain-driven valve gear replaced with 3 separate sets of much more reliable Wall-Shots valve gear, as well as being given new cylindrical smoke boxes, Lord Nelson-style chimneys, and LMS-style smoke deflectors. Extra sounding gear was also added to the leading and middle driving axles to help improve the class's wheel slip problems. Number 35018 British India Line was the first merchant navy to have its rebuild completed in 1956, with the last to be rebuilt, number 35028 Clan Line, being completed in 1960. It should go without saying that the rebuilt merchant navies were a tremendous improvement over their spam can forms. Although the rebuilds did put greater hammer blow on the track due to the new Wall-Shots valve gear requiring balance weights, but this was only a minor drawback. Arguably the Merchant Navy's finest hour came on June 26, 1967, when a Weymouth to Waterloo mail train, hauled by number 35003, fittingly named Royal Mail, reached the highest ever recorded speed for the class, hitting 106 miles an hour just east of Winchfield. This would be one of the final times a British steam locomotive would ever exceed 100 miles an hour for almost 50 years, a gap only broken when new-build A1 Peppercorn number 60163 Tornado hit 100 during a trial run on the East Coast Main Line on April 12, 2017. Back to the merchant navies, 35003 Royal Mail's 106 mile an hour run proved to be one final hurrah for British Southern Region Steam, as just 2 weeks later, on the 9th of July 1967, the final steam-hauled BR Southern Region services ran, with Merchant Navy number 35030 Elder Dempster Lines hauling the last ever commercial steam-hauled Weymouth to Waterloo passenger service. But before we talk about the preserved merchant navies and why I love them so much, let's talk about their slightly smaller brothers and sisters first, the West Country and Battle of Britain classes, known collectively as the Light Pacifics. First appearing in 1945, 4 years after the merchant navies, Bulleid designed the Light Pacifics as, well, lighter versions of the merchant navies to allow for wider route availability, i.e. access to lines which the merchant navies were too heavy for. It's worth noting that Bulleid had to cheekily designate the merchant navies as mixed traffic engines, even though in reality they were exclusively passenger engines, in order for them to be greenlit for construction due to the wartime requirement for all locomotives across Britain to be used on passenger, troop and freight trains, regardless of the work they were actually built for. The Light Pacifics, on the other hand, actually were mixed traffic engines, being equally capable of hauling both passenger and freight trains, and being used on all types of services. The Light Pacifics were much more numerous than the merchant navies, with a total of 110 being built between 1945 and 1951. They were all named after West Country locations or Royal Air Force squadrons, airfields, commanders and aircraft that had participated in the Battle of Britain, hence the Light Pacifics becoming known as the West Country and Battle of Britain classes. As you might expect, the Light Pacifics initially suffered from all the same mechanical problems as the merchant navies did. Excessive wheel slip, unreliable chain-driven valve gear, high fuel consumption, insufficient driver visibility, yes, even the oil bath leaks and occasional spontaneous combustion of the boiler lagging plagued the Light Pacifics as well. But at least they could go to more places, right? In any case, more than half of the Light Pacifics got the same rebuild treatment as their bigger siblings, following the huge success of the rebuilt merchant navies, with number 34005 Barnstable being the first Light Pacific to be rebuilt. While the entire merchant navy class ended up being rebuilt, due to the imminent end of steam on British railways, 50 of the Light Pacifics were never rebuilt, and remained in their spam cam forms right up to the end of Southern Region steam. Some of the rebuilt Light Pacifics barely even got a chance to run in before they were withdrawn. Number 34028 Eddystone, for example, had only covered 287,000 miles since his rebuilding, and number 34109, Sir Trafford Lee Malroy, had only covered 162,000 miles in 3.5 years since his rebuilding. Calling that wasteful would be a massive understatement. Though mainly thanks to Barry Scrapyard, a combined total of 20 unrebuilt and rebuilt Light Pacifics have made it into preservation. Number 34067 Tangmere in particular will always be one of my favourite Light Pacifics, as he was the first steam locomotive I was ever pulled by on a mainline rail tour when I went on the Cumbrian Mountain Express back in October 2025. So with 20 Light Pacifics in preservation, along with 11 preserved merchant navies, amazingly more than a third of the entire latter class, that gives us a staggering combined total of 31 preserved Bully Pacifics. Thanks, Di Woodham. The relatively high number of preserved Bully Pacifics are proof that you can never have too much of a nice thing. Despite these engines originally proving unreliable and problematic, they are absolutely beloved by enthusiasts, and rightfully so. I personally don't know whether I prefer the unrebuilt or rebuilt Bully Pacifics, so I love them both equally for different reasons. The boxy, unrebuilt spam cans, for all their flaws, have an extremely unique and innovative appearance and design, which perfectly shows off all of Bully's best and worst locomotive design traits for all to see, while the slimmer yet much more graceful rebuilds are a showcase of everything Bully did right with these engines, along with everything BR did to iron out their kinks and dramatically improve them to create relatively modern, near-perfect steam locomotives. The Bully Pacifics in general also look simply amazing thundering along on mainline rail tours, hauling Pullman coaches at 75 miles an hour. Seriously, if you live in London or Kent and have never seen Clan Line hauling the Bellman British Pullman in person, you are missing out. I'd highly recommend doing so next time Clan Line heads down to Dover with the BBP. It's about as close to a 21st century golden arrow as you can get. And oh my god, do I even need to explain how much I love three-cylinder locomotive sounds at this point? I don't think I have to elaborate on why the Bully Pacifics are my favourite Southern Railway locomotives any further. They may have had a rocky start in life, but all things considered, they were truly the finest engines the British Railway Southern region had to offer, and have more than rightfully earned their place as some of the most widely beloved British steam locomotives. Now for number 15, we have the LNER V2s. These are basically slightly downsized mixed traffic versions of the Gresley A3s, with one less set of wheels on the front pony truck. A total of 184 V2s were built at both Doncaster and Darlington Works between 1936 and 1944. They were often used on express freight trains, most notably on Scotland to London fish trains. And before anyone says anything about fish trains crashing, I've done my research, and surprisingly it turns out that some of the V2s have had several accidents which unfolded similarly to Henry the Green engine's infamous Flying Kipper crash, with rear-end collisions, trains hauled by V2s crashing into wreckages of other crash trains, and even, believe it or not one but two incidents where full-screen signals cause V2 hauled trains to crash. Makes me wonder if Reverend Audrey drew inspiration for Henry's Flying Kipper crash from several of the V2's crashes as well as the Abbots Ripton crash. Anyway, the V2s proved to be one of Sir Nigel Gresley's most versatile and reliable locomotives, capable of working freight trains at up to 60 miles an hour and easily deputising for the LNER's Pacifics on express passenger trains. In peak condition, a V2 could almost match their bigger siblings in sustained high-speed running, with one being reliably timed at 93 miles an hour while hauling the Yorkshire Pullman, and another impressively reaching 101.5 miles an hour on a test train. Not bad at all for a 262 Prairie. but the V2's finest hours came during World War II, when they time and again demonstrated staggering haulage capabilities. Trains over 20 coaches in length and loaded to over 700 tons proved to be well within their abilities, exactly what was needed from these engines when hauling troop trains. On at least one occasion, a single V2 was amazingly able to haul 26 fully loaded coaches from Peterborough to London. The V2s performed equally incredibly post-nationalisation, leaving their mark on the East Coast Main Line, the Carlisle to Edinburgh Waverley Line, and even the ex-Great Central Main Line from London Marylebone to Sheffield. But, for as amazing as the V2s are, nothing is perfect, and these engines did have a few minor problems. The single-axle front pony truck proved to be a bit sensitive to bad track, which caused a series of derailments. And unusually for a Gresley design, the 3-cylinder layout was cast as a single monoblock unit. Why this design choice was made, I'm unsure, but in any case, if only one of the cylinders was worn beyond repair, the entire unit had to be thrown out and replaced. But by the 1950s, these minor kinks were mostly ironed out, and not even the introduction of the Thompson B1s could replace the V2s. Mainly due to the B2s simply never being able to match the V2's power output. The V2's swan song ended up being on the Edinburgh to Aberdeen main line, where they worked alongside the last of the A2s and A4s, with the entire V2 class being withdrawn between February 1962 and December 1966. Only one V2 has made it into preservation, the first one built, number 4771 Green Arrow, who was named after the Aberdeen to London express fish train service, similarly to how Flying Scotsman was named after the flagship London to Edinburgh express passenger service. Withdrawn from King's Cross Shed in August 1962, Green Arrow was one of the lucky few hundred steam locomotives to be selected for preservation as part of the National Collection. He was cosmetically restored at Darlington Works and put on static display in several locations around the country from April 1963. Green Arrow was originally intended to become one of the permanent exhibits at a proposed municipal museum in Leicester, but before the museum was ready, Wigston Locomotive Depot, where Green Arrow was in storage at the time, was scheduled for demolition, so Green Arrow had to be moved down south in September 1970 to the Pullman Car Company workshops at Preston Park. But by this time, the National Railway Museum was in the planning stages, and in November 1971, Green Arrow was selected not only for display at the NRM, but also to haul mainline rail tours. Throughout 1972, Green Arrow was overhauled to working order at Norwich Depot, with said overhaul being completed in early 1973, following which he made his first ever run in preservation on the 28th of March that year to Ely, before commencing a series of rail tours, then being moved to Carnforth on the 2nd of July that year. In September 1979, Green Arrow hauled the Centenary Express, a nationwide rail tour organised by Travellers Fair to celebrate the centenary of on-train catering. Green Arrow remained a regular sight on mainline rail tours and heritage railways all over the country until being withdrawn from service on the 21st of April 2008, shortly before his boiler ticket expired. Following this, Green Arrow returned to static display, this time going to the Locomotion Museum in Shildon, County Durham. As of this video's premiere date, Green Arrow currently resides in the Danham Gallery, Library and Museum in Doncaster. Having not run for almost 18 years at this point, I firmly believe that Green Arrow is a prime candidate to be overhauled to mainline standards and returned to service. If the incredible performance and achievements of the V2s doesn't prove how much I love them, I don't know what will. They're literally the younger brothers and sisters of Flying Scotsman and the other A3s. How can anyone not love them? The V2s are without doubt my favourite 262 Prairie locomotives. It's so disappointing we only have one in preservation. Moving on to number 14, we have the Great Western Railway 2800s and 2884s. They're both basically the same class of engine, with only very minor and barely noticeable differences, so there's no excuse to not give them a shared spot on this list. The 2800s date as far back as 1903, when the prototype, designed by George Jackson Churchward, was built at Swindon Works as the first ever British 280 locomotive. 2 years later, in 1905, the first production batch began construction, with the 2800s remaining in production all the way until 1919, by which point a total of 84 had been built. Throughout almost their entire working lives, the 2800s were the GWR's primary heavy freight engines, very quickly replacing the older, smaller and far less powerful Dean Goods 060s on heavy freight trains. The Deans may have been little more than 20 years old when the 2800s were introduced, but with the 2800s quite literally having more than double the tractive effort the Deans had, it's really not surprising the Deans were displaced from heavy freight duties when they were still relatively young. I mean, 35,380 pounds of tractive effort is absolutely outstanding for an Edwardian locomotive class, isn't it? Although, the 280 consolidation wheel arrangement had already been in extensive use in America since the 1860s, so why no British CME thought to try out the wheel arrangement on the other side of the pond much sooner is beyond me. In any case, George Jackson Churchward knew that 280s worked for America, so we have him to thank for proving they could easily work for Britain as well. With the requirement for 2 Deans to double-head the GWR's heaviest freight trains no longer necessary, the 2800s were put to work on Wales to London coal trains, with total loaded weights of 1,000 tons or more. But if you think that's impressive, what if I told you that was only half of their full capabilities? In 1908, number 2808 was able to pull a train 107 wagons long and over 2,000 tons in weight on a 73-mile trip from Swindon to Acton. This was nearly 120 years ago, don't forget. If this doesn't prove how ahead of their time the 2800s were, and how incredible of a genius George Jackson Churchward was, I don't know what will. The huge success of the 2800s convinced most other British railway companies that 280s were the perfect 20th century heavy freight engines, and before long, other 280 classes started appearing all over the country. We'll talk about a few more of those in a moment. Despite being freight engines, the 2800s were assigned to passenger trains when necessary, on which they proved just as capable of keeping to time as their 460 co-workers. Nearly 20 years after the last 2800 rolled out of Swindon Works, Churchward's successor, Charles Collett, decided to revisit the design and modify it slightly, creating the 2884 class. The very minor upgrades Collett gave the 2884s, including fitting side windows to their cabs, as well as external steam pipes, as opposed to the internal ones which were prone to leaking, Churchward gave the 2800s. The 2884s also had their boilers pitched slightly lower in the frames than the 2800s, but aside from these barely noticeable differences, both classes are pretty much identical, and anyone, even serious train enthusiasts, would be forgiven for getting them mixed up, so they might as well be grouped into a single class. A total of 83 2884s were built between 1938 and 1942, with production of course really ramping up during the war. The army needed its troops and freight after all. As a result of post-war coal shortages, between 1945 and 1947, the GWR experimented with oil firing some of its steam locomotives. As such, a combined total of 20 2800s and 2884s were converted to oil-burning engines and renumbered to the 4800 and 4850 classes respectively. This government-encouraged experiment was abandoned in 1948 once the extra maintenance and oil import costs were calculated and realised, and all of the GWR's oil-burning steam locomotives were converted back to coal-burning by April 1950. By 1948 and nationalisation, the 2800s and 2884s had become so popular by ex-Great Western crews that BR Western Region operating authorities wanted more of the class built. But this request was turned down in favour of the 9Fs, which I can't blame them for at all.
Foreshadowing. If you know, you know.
And as if it wasn't already clear enough to you how amazing these engines dating all the way back to the Edwardian era are, one of the 2884s, the now preserved number 3803, performed amazingly well in the 1948 locomotive exchange trials, being up against far more modern heavy freight engines, such as the LMS-8Fs and War Department austerities. I've said it before and I'll say it again, George Jackson Churchward was a genius. It wasn't until the 9Fs were introduced in 1954 that the 2800s and 2884s finally started being displaced from their heavy mineral haulage duties, but even then, they were still given plenty of work to do right up to the end of Western Region Steam in 1965, after an incredible 60 years of commercial service. A combined total of 16 2800s and 2884s have either been preserved or used as spare parts donor engines for other GWR steam locomotive restoration and new build projects. Two of the 2800s becoming parts donors have proven somewhat controversial, yet understandable decisions. I mean, poor number 2861 here was rotten beyond belief after rusting away in Barry Scrapyard for 50 years, so is it any wonder that he was broken up for spare parts at the Llangollen Railway in 2014, with his frames being scrapped? I don't think so. Number 2873 has also been dismantled for spare parts, but not necessarily outright scrapped. His frames are currently in storage, while most of his parts are currently being used to maintain other Great Western locomotives based at the Dartmouth Steam Railway. At one point, 2873's boiler was actually intended to be used for a new build Star-class locomotive, but those plans never came to be. We'll just have to wait and see if 2873 will ever be put back together with new parts and run again. As for the other 14 preserved 2800s and 2884s, they've all mostly had far more fortunate preserved lives, with number 2857 having the best luck of them all. Returned to steam in September 1979, following restoration from Barry Scrapyard condition, 6 years later in 1985, as part of the GWR's 150th anniversary celebrations, 2857 hauled a one-off mixed goods train on the national network as part of a rail freight spectacular event. No other steam locomotive would haul a goods train on the national network again for another 15 years. So quite a remarkable achievement for 2857, isn't it? Overall, the 2800s and 2884s are just two of several locomotive classes that represent George Jackson Churchward at his best. Ahead of their time in Britain, with exceptional capabilities, they truly did revolutionise British freight trains. So can you blame me for giving them a shared spot on this list? Sticking to the theme of 280 freight engines, for number 13, we have two LMS 280s, the Somerset and Dorset Railway 7Fs and the LMS Stanier 8Fs. The 7Fs, designed by Henry Fowler, date all the way back to 1914, when the first batch of 6 were built by the Midland Railway at Derby Works. The Midland Railway were in charge of the locomotive policy on the Somerset and Dorset Railway, which they jointly owned with the London and South Western Railway. Long story. The Somerset and Dorset had steep gradients, so required far bigger and more powerful engines than what was available from the Midland Railway's pool of small engines. The end result was a class of locomotive unlike any other Derby-designed locomotive of the time. The 7Fs were initially too large for some of the turntables on the S&D, so it was envisaged that they would spend half their time running backwards. As a result, they were fitted with single-line token exchanging apparatus on both sides of the locomotive. A further batch of 5 7Fs were built by Robert Stevenson and Company in 1925, bringing the total number built to 11. The 7Fs proved extremely successful on the S&D and its steep climbs over the Mendip Hills, even occasionally being allowed to pull summer Saturday passenger trains. So much so that the Midland Railway decided to trial them on coal trains in the East Midlands, but they unfortunately proved less satisfactory in this role. Their hill climbing capabilities weren't needed in the East Midlands due to its lines having much gentler gradients. As a result, the 7Fs proved much less fuel efficient in the East Midlands and consumed considerable amounts of the region's high-quality coal. They were therefore sent back to the S&D shortly after. But what the 7Fs are arguably most well known for is the infamous Bath Green Park disaster, the events of which genuinely sound like something straight out of a railway series story. I might make an entire train crash disaster documentary about this crash at some point, but to summarise, on November 20th, 1929, number 89, one of the now preserved 7Fs, was hauling a northbound mineral train towards Bath. Due to the train having just departed Midford after a timetabled stop and its weight, the train was travelling slowly through Combe Down Tunnel. The tunnel was over a mile long, extremely narrow, and had no intermediate ventilation whatsoever. So as you can imagine, as the train slowly trundled through the tunnel, the engine's carbon dioxide-rich smoke built up all throughout the tunnel with no way of escaping, choking the driver and fireman, and before long, making them pass out. With the crew incapacitated, the train became a runaway, picking up speed on the downhill stretch towards Bath, and without anything similar to the GWR's ATC system to stop it, let alone any modern-day safety systems like AWS or TPWS, what happened when it reached the goods yard near Bath Green Park Station was inevitable. Driver Henry Jennings and 2 yard shunters were killed in the crash. The fireman, Mr. Pierce, and the train's guard were both severely injured, but thankfully survived. The freight train's wagons, as well as others stabled in the goods yard, were more or less obliterated and piled on top of the locomotive in a smoking wreckage. It was clear as day that the very long, unventilated Combe Down tunnel was the primary cause of the crash, which would have been easily avoided had the navvies who built the tunnel all the way back in the 1870s thought to build ventilation shafts at intervals along the full length of the tunnel, which should have been common sense by then. The Metropolitan Railway left frequent openings in their tunnels under London for the steam from their locomotives to escape, and that had been standard construction practice for over 10 years prior to Combe Down Tunnel's opening. And even earlier than that, Kilsby Tunnel, built for the London and Birmingham Railway by none other than Robert Stephenson himself, all the way back in the 1830s, had ventilation shafts built, which you can still see today when travelling through the tunnel up the West Coast Main Line. So that should say a lot about how idiotic the S&D's navvies were if they didn't even bother to learn from the great Robert Stephenson and build the mile-long, extremely narrow Combe Down Tunnel with ventilation shafts over 40 years later. The Bath Green Park disaster was simply an accident waiting to happen. Alright, sorry, we've gone off topic. I just wanted to vent about how stupid the S&D's navvies were for not even having the common sense to build such a long and narrow tunnel with ventilation shafts during the age of steam. Let's get back to talking about the 7Fs now. All of the S&D's locomotives were taken on by the LMS in 1930, and all had been renumbered by 1932. After nationalisation, all 11 7Fs were withdrawn by BR between 1959 and 1964, and just 2 years later, on Saturday, March 5th, 1966, the Somerset and Dorset Railway ran for the final time and was permanently closed under Dr. Beeching's axe. The original S&D may be gone, but thankfully, it lives on in the form of 2 sections of the line being reopened as heritage railways and 2 of the 11 7Fs being preserved, numbers 88 and 89, both of which being rescued from Barry Scrapyard. Considering how few 7Fs were actually built, I think we should all be grateful that we even have 1, let alone 2 in preservation. And again, this is all thanks to Di Woodham and his policy of prioritising breaking up freight wagons as opposed to locomotives. Were it not for him, none of these already rare, unique and incredible locomotives would still be around today. Somehow, despite these engines' size, strength, power, and incredible hill climbing capabilities, they still have a degree of grace to them. Maybe it's because their boilers, fireboxes, and driving wheels are really well proportioned, neither too big nor too small. Or perhaps it's because I really like how the cylinders are sloped, a design choice made to enable these engines to avoid fouling station platforms. In any case, the rarity of these engines, even in their heyday, combined with their unique design choices, especially by Midland Railway standards, very well proportioned overall shape, and incredible capabilities of pulling such long, heavy freight trains over such steep gradients, are all qualities that guaranteed them a shared spot on this list. I myself have been lucky enough to have travelled behind one of the preserved 7Fs, number 88, when I went to the West Somerset Railway back in May 2018. So overall, these rare, unique and underrated 280s, which I now have a somewhat personal connection to, simply couldn't be denied a spot on this list. They were, in my opinion, the finest engines the Somerset and Dorset Railway had to offer. But what about their bigger and younger siblings, the 8Fs? Well, they first came about over 20 years after the 7Fs in 1935. They were designed as freight versions of William Stanier's mixed-traffic Black 5s, with an insane total of 852 being built. 10 more than even the almost equally numerous Black 5s. Makes the mere 11 7Fs seem like needles in haystacks, doesn't it? 126 8Fs were ordered at first, but by 1939, demand had skyrocketed for one reason and one reason only: war. Demand for the 8Fs ended up being so great during World War II that they ended up being built by no less than 11 different manufacturers. And they weren't just built for the railways of Britain either, as they were exported to dozens of countries and adapted for said countries' railways, including France, Egypt, Iran, Italy, Turkey, and Iraq. Regardless of where they ended up though, the 8Fs proved pretty much just as successful as the Black 5s. They were very smooth riding for freight engines, and were far more powerful and had far better weather protection than the Midland and LNWR engines they replaced. So as you'd expect, they quickly gained huge respect from both LMS and overseas enginemen. They were also very nippy by freight engine standards, easily able to reach 50 or 60 miles an hour, and being occasionally allowed to pull passenger trains as a result. As wartime demand remained as high as ever, the other three Big Four railway companies placed orders for their own 8Fs as well, with the LNER classifying theirs as 06s. Very sadly, however, 23 of the 8Fs sent abroad were lost at sea, following torpedo attacks on the ships transporting them. After the war, a total of 624 8Fs passed into BR ownership upon nationalisation. BR later purchased a further 42 ex-military 8Fs, bringing their total to 666. The 8Fs continue to prove successful and durable locomotives under BR, with mass withdrawals not beginning until 1964 and 150 8Fs carrying on until the very final month of BR steam in August 1968. However, the 8Fs exported overseas continued their commercial service in some countries for quite a bit longer, with Turkey, who nicknamed theirs Churchills after I think you know who, keeping theirs going until the 1980s. A total of 14 8Fs are still around today, the majority of which reside in the UK, with some of these even being brought home after withdrawal by Turkish state railways. Two of them remain in storage in Turkey to this day, and amazingly, one of them, number 1429, was rediscovered in Baghdad during the Iraq War. 1429's current whereabouts are unknown, however, but arguably the most well-known of the preserved 8Fs is number 48305, best known for these infamous photos, where he's seen rusting away in Barry Scrapyard with a sad, teary-eyed face painted on his smokebox door, along with the words, "Please don't let me die." If these bittersweet pictures don't silence anyone who says that locomotives don't have feelings, I don't know what will. Very thankfully, 48305 did get the happily ever after he pleaded for, after being preserved by the Great Central Railway, where he's been regularly running since 1995. So what do I actually think of the 8Fs? Well, in my opinion, to call the 8Fs underrated would be a huge understatement. While not quite as thick and chunky as the Great Central Robinson engines, they're still beefy boys, aren't there? With their huge boilers, wide frames, big cylinders, and massive tenders. No wonder they were initially the chosen standard freight engine design for the British War Department. Their beefiness alone guaranteed them a shared spot on this list. The reason I rank them higher than all of Robinson's Great Central engines is because the 8Fs achieved a lot more throughout their working lives than the GCR's fleet. Because of their extensive wartime service, countless stories about the 8Fs have been told over the years, which makes them extremely interesting and noble engines. And before any Stories of Sodor fans say a word, no. To my knowledge, not one of the real-life 8Fs wartime stories involved one of them, or even their crew, launching a shell at a German hospital and killing civilians. The 8Fs were most certainly not war criminals. So yes, I felt it only right for these big, beefy, underrated 280s, with many noble and heroic wartime stories behind them, to share the number 13 spot with the rare, unique, eye-catching, graceful, and equally underrated Somerset and Dorset 280s. I will proudly call the 7Fs and 8Fs my joint favourite LMS freight engines any day. Now for number 12, we have the BR Standard Class 6 Clans and Standard Class 7 Britannias, two classes of BR Standard Pacifics designed by Robert Riddles. The Britannias came first, so we'll talk about them first. The Britannias were the very first engines built in BR's standard class series of steam locomotives. Billed as mixed traffic engines, the first of them emerged from Crewe Works in January 1951. The standard class series were designed as some of the most modern, reliable, efficient, and versatile steam locomotives in history, capable of being used across the entire BR network and incorporating all the best steam locomotive design choices perfected by the Big Four. 55 Britannias were built in total, with the last one being completed in September 1954. Many labour-saving features were incorporated into these engines to maximise their nationwide versatility and minimise labour and maintenance costs, such as a fully enclosed cab with padded seats for both driver and fireman, fully accessible controls, a firebox rocking grate to remove clinker without stopping, and a smokebox ash sieve, making the Britannia smokeboxes easier to clean out than their older counterparts. Unlike most Big Four Pacifics, which had 3 or 4 cylinders, the Britannias were only given 2 outside cylinders for the sake of ease of maintenance. But to compensate for the lack of extra power, the cylinders were made as large as the British loading gauge would allow, giving the Britannias a tractive effort of 32,150 pounds. The use of Walshart's valve gear and raised running plates above the wheels, allowing easy access to the inside of the frames, also added to the Britannia's ease of maintenance. The theme of the standard series, combining the best of all Big Four design practices, continued with the valve gear being partly of LNER design, the boiler of LMS and Southern design, the cab layout also of LNER design, and the rear pair of trailing wheels also of Southern design. 25 Britannias were initially ordered, but demand for them on the eastern region was so great that the second batch was rushed through construction before the first batch's teething problems had been ironed out, of which they had several, including the driving wheels shifting on their axles, hard and rough ride quality, and overheating bearings. Despite these early design flaws, the Britannias became well liked by crews in most BR regions. Emphasis on most though, as Western region crews didn't take very kindly to them at all, due to the Britannias being left-hand drive, while the XGWR locomotives and XGWR signalling practices were designed for right-hand drive. The southern region, meanwhile, already had over 140 of its own, still fairly new, bullied Pacifics, so simply didn't need the Britannias. 3 Britannias were allocated to haul the London to Dover Golden Arrow for a short time, and several others were kept on standby to fill in for failed merchant navies. But overall, the Britannias were surplus to the southern region's requirements, and were soon all transferred to the other regions. But the Britannias performed best on the eastern region, where their lower weight and high power brought a major upgrade to motive power on the weight-restricted East Anglian lines out of London Liverpool Street. The Britannias were capable of hauling London to Norwich Express trains a distance of 115 miles in 2 hours and 10 minutes, with a stop at Ipswich, a run which they were capable of completing 4 times a day. Very impressive indeed, that is. They ended up being the extremely reliable engines they were designed to be as well, capable of averaging 100,000 miles a year without needing major maintenance. But while the Britannias were overall highly successful after their teething troubles were ironed out, I'm afraid I can't quite say the same for their slightly smaller siblings, the Standard Class 6 Clans. 10 of them were built between December 1951 and March 1952 as lighter versions of the Britannias, giving the Clans slightly higher route availability, which was required as they were to be allocated to the more heavily restricted main lines of the Scottish region. Like the second batch of Britannias, the 10 Clans were rushed through construction before their teething troubles had been ironed out. 25 Clans had been ordered at first, but the last 15 were repeatedly postponed due to the 1950 steel shortages until the announcement of BR's modernisation plan in 1955, resulting in the order for the last 15 Clans being cancelled entirely. Upon entering service, the Clans had an overall mixed reception. While crews who were regularly assigned to them ended up liking them, those who were unfamiliar with them found them difficult to handle and regularly complained about their supposed lack of pulling power. Unlike the Britannias, the Clans also suffered from poor steaming, which was a result of their rushed production. However, the Clans still proved themselves to be capable locomotives when handled properly, being able to pull 14 coach trains over Shap and Beattock summits on the West Coast Main Line without the assistance of a banker. And very impressively, number 72001 Clancameron remains the only Pacific locomotive to have ever worked over the West Highland Line to this day. This was the result of a successful trial held in early 1956 to see whether a Pacific could traverse the steeply graded line. Having passed the test, Clancameron was allowed to work special trains for the Clancameron Gathering that June, this being the Scottish clan the locomotive was named after. Hilariously, some of the clans were even called to fill in for many of the unreliable early diesel locomotives, whose regular failures plagued the entire BR network at the time. But despite these various successes, BR generally regarded the clans as failures, and all 10 were withdrawn between December 1962 and June 1966, with none of them being preserved. Though thankfully, the clans will soon be coming back from extinction. Since 2010, a new build clan class locomotive has been under construction, this being number 72010 Hengist. As of this video's premiere date, the project, which is currently based at CTL Seal in Sheffield, seems to be progressing at a very good pace. Again, if you'd like to keep up to date with Hengist construction progress, I'll leave a link to the Clan Project's website in the description. As for the Britannias, they've been quite a bit more fortunate in preservation. Their withdrawals didn't begin until June 1965, with the last ones carrying on right up until the very end of BR Steam in August 1968. By then, the only region that was still using steam on a daily basis was the Midland region, and on the last day of all, Sunday, August 11th, 1968, the very last steam-hauled BR passenger service ran. 1T57, the 15 Guinea Special. With 3 Black 5s hauling the train on most legs of the trip, the Manchester to Carlisle leg was hauled by the last Britannia still in commercial service. Number 70013 Oliver Cromwell. This historic run guaranteed Oliver a spot in the National Collection, while the original prototype and class namesake, number 70,000 Britannia, was privately purchased directly from BR by the Britannia Locomotive Group. To this day, Britannia herself continues to regularly venture onto the main line and tour many heritage railways. Oliver Cromwell, meanwhile, after many years on static display at the Bressingham Steam Museum, moved to the Great Central Railway following an ownership dispute between Bressingham and the National Railway Museum. After an overhaul at Loughborough, partly funded by readers of Steam Railway magazine, Oliver returned to service for the first time in almost 40 years at the GCR in May 2008, and like his sister, has been a regular sight on mainline rail tours ever since. Oliver even hauled a rerun of the 15 Guinea Special in August 2008 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the original run. With the Britannias having so much historical significance in more ways than one, I don't think I have to explain why they and the clans are my joint third favourites of the BR standard classes. Like many of the other engines I've talked about so far, the clans and Britannias are big and powerful, yet fast and graceful, and they have one of my favourite smoke deflector designs. Said smoke deflectors, paired with the raised running plates, make the clans and Britannias, in my opinion, some of the most badass looking steam locomotives. Their high versatility also enabled their high ranking on this list, and they may not be 3-cylinder engines, but they still make a bloody good sound indeed. Robert Riddles really knew how to make some fine beasts, didn't he? While I do prefer the vast majority of the Big Four era Pacifics, the clans and Britannias are still absolutely incredible and extremely badass locomotives. It's appalling how they weren't even given half of the 40th year service life they deserve. But hey, at least we have 2 Britannias still around at all, and a new build clan on the way. I cannot wait to eventually see Hengist out on the main line in hopefully only a few years' time. Can you? At number 11, we have the US Army Transportation Corps S-160s. Yes, I know these engines were built in America, not Britain, but they did work in Britain during World War II and were specifically built for the British loading gauge, alright? So bugger off, I'm not cheating! Anyway, if you know anything about wartime locomotives, you'll very likely have heard of the compact and very bulky S-160s before. Designed by Major J.W. Marsh of the Railway Branch of the Corps of Engineers, they were the most numerous locomotives built for Allied use, with a jaw-dropping grand total of 2,120 S-160s built, with 400 of these being shipped to Britain. The S-160s were specially designed to run on poor quality track, wrecked by enemy damage and extreme overuse. The engines were built using fast and efficient construction methods, using rolled boiler plates as opposed to boiler castings, as well as being fitted with axle box grease lubricators and having the vast majority of their components fitted to their exteriors for ease of maintenance. The front pair of driving axles were also sprung independently from the rear pair. This, combined with the S-160's unique bar frames, were key to ensuring they could easily run on the wrecked track they were designed to without derailing, while their large tenders were derived of those of the similar British WD-210 austerities, with the tender's coal bunker inset above the water tank to improve visibility when running backwards. Overall, the S-160s were designed as battle-ready locomotive soldiers in their own right. At least, that was the idea. Throughout their brief time working across Britain, the S-160s played a huge role in shipping military weapons, equipment, troops and supplies in preparation for the D-Day invasion. After the success of the Normandy landings, the British S-160s were sent back to Ebbw Junction Depot in Newport, Wales, where they'd first arrived in Britain 2 years prior in 1942, were overhauled, then shipped to mainland Europe, where they proved vital in liberating France, Belgium and the Netherlands from the Nazis, advancing on Germany itself, and ultimately taking Berlin. They even had a little trick up their buffer beam should they fall into enemy hands, which was basically the steam locomotive equivalent of a suicide pill. When first built, the S-160s were fitted with a drain cock located in the corner of the cab that could be opened to let all the sludge they built up out of their boiler, but it couldn't be closed again, forcing the boiler to run dry. This way, there was no way the Jerrys could make any use of them. For all their wartime advantages and tricks though, the heavy demand for them and their rapid mass production did result in some compromises in their design, leading to several operational failures. The S-160s regularly suffered from hot axle boxes, and their Westinghouse steam brakes were hugely insufficient. Their wheel flanges were also too tight to run on British tracks, and the modifications they received caused the flanges to pick points and derail the engines when running backwards. But their biggest and most infamous mechanical fault was their vulnerability to firebox crown sheet failures. You see, the Kilngir water gauge design was unfamiliar to British crews. It was necessary to open both the top and bottom water injectors slowly, or the check valves would close, trapping the water in the gauge and giving a false reading. If the check valves were not fully open, crews could be misled into thinking the boiler's water level was reasonable, even if it was becoming dangerously low. And if you know anything about steam locomotive safety, you'll know that low water levels can allow the top of the firebox, known as the crown sheet, to overheat. This causes the stay bolts holding the crown sheet in place to fail, resulting in the crown sheet caving in on itself into the firebox with little warning. And when a steam locomotive firebox crown sheet fails, it results in a boiler explosion. And boiler explosions caused by firebox crown sheet collapses are exactly what happened to no less than 3 British S-160s in just 10 months, the first of which killing a GWR fireman while he was working on S-160 number 2403 in November 1943. Thankfully, the S-160's boiler explosion stopped after British crews were properly trained on slowly opening the water injectors, and with sufficient maintenance and a few modifications, the vast majority of S-160s did eventually prove themselves to be the railway soldiers they were built as. The S-160s weren't just built for British use though. The Americans built them for use all over Europe, including in France, Italy, Spain, most of Central and Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and even, briefly in 1947, in American and British occupied regions of Germany. Some even found their way to Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, and even as far east as China, North and South Korea. And eventually, they could be found in 23 countries around the world. So no, the S-160s are not purely American locomotives. I see them as international locomotives, and because they were built for and worked in Britain, they do indeed qualify for this list. Unfortunately, like the vast majority of locomotives specially built for wartime use, they were only designed to last a few years. By 1946, there was only one S160 left in Britain, with this being scrapped in 1957. However, despite the S160's short life expectancy, some of them carried on in commercial service in countries such as China until the 1990s, and of the 2,120 S160s built, at least 33 are known to have been preserved, with probably even more still around in derelict condition. And of these 33, 8 of them have found their way back to the UK. Goes to show the benefits of mass producing so much of something, doesn't it? So, have these Yanks earned their place in British railway preservation? Absolutely. I mean, for a start, how many other British locomotives can you name that have whistles that sound as awesome as these? Christ, I love American chime whistles. The S160s also just generally look so unique. They're unlike any other American-built freight engines with how compact they are. This may make them small by American locomotive standards, but they're still quite big by worldwide standards, and I think I've made it clear to you all now that I like my steam locomotives big. They also have one of the most interesting histories of any locomotive class. I find it so fascinating how they were built as cheaply and efficiently as possible to be as reliable and durable as possible, yet only last a few years, only for them to be some of the shittiest and most unreliable wartime locomotives ever built before their post-D-Day overhauls. And over 2,000 were still built despite their unreliability. Goes to show how desperate the Allies were to put the Axis powers in their rightful place, doesn't it? Though I'll always associate the S160s with the Churnet Valley Railway in Staffordshire, as they own not one but two operational S160s, numbers 5197 and 6046. Sure, the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway have Big Jim, and the North Yorkshire Moors Railway have Omaha, arguably two more well-known S160s, but the fact the Churnet Valley Railway own more than one of these infamously difficult-to-work-with American-built locomotives, re-imported from the outside world, let alone have both of them in operational condition, is simply outstanding to me. Really goes to show how far the dedication and perseverance of railway preservationists can, and more often than not, does go, doesn't it? As a whole, the S160s are proof that even the most flawed and overlooked of underdogs can bounce back hard and fast, and end up going extremely far in more ways than one, getting insanely good luck, and doing some incredibly great things. All I have left to say to these big, bulky, heavy-hauling Yanks is, thank you for your service, not just during the war, but during your preservation careers as well.